All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.
Very much. So, as Marjorie says, my name's Lisa. I've been a nurse for, I call myself a baby nurse. I've only been a nurse for 9 years. I just turned 60. I'm gonna sit with y'all. I've worked in long-term care for many years on Alzheimer's units, so I have a lot of experience with dementia at the end of life. Done a lot of hospice at both of those, at both the Farron, which is my first job out of nursing school, and at Charlene Manor, and also at the Fisher Home as a per diem nurse, a per diem hospice nurse. So I've always loved hospice, palliative care, and we'll talk about the differences between those and whatever it is. And the reason that what propelled me into being here right now is when my husband and I redid our wills during his sabbatical, because our children were both long past the age of 21, and our whole will was about guardianship issues, which is often the case of parents with young children. So we had to, we could get rid of most of what was in the will. And I knew a little bit about Health Care Proxies from having, most of our patients in long-term care have an invoked Health Care Proxy, and we'll talk about what that is. So I started delving into it, and living wills, and the most form, and all these different things, and I came to appreciate how very complicated it all is. It's really complicated. You've got legal issues, you have medical issues, you have ethical issues, you have personal choice issues, and it works best if you plan ahead. And that is challenging in this culture where people don't even want to consider the fact that someday, newsflash, you're gonna die, right? And the weird thing about dying is, unlike having a child 9 months or so after you find out you're pregnant, or going on a vacation this coming June for 3 weeks, or whatever it is, you don't know when you're gonna die. That's the confounding part that really, I think, makes it even more mysterious and complicated and perplexing. So, I thought, if I'm having issues understanding all this and wrapping my head around this, then everybody must be. Because I've been thinking about death my whole life. I mean, I've always read about it, I'm interested in it, it's a subject that really fascinates me. I studied medical anthropology in college, so I became more and more interested in talking to people about it, and what I realized is most people have no idea of the things that are really important and that could help them to have a truly meaningful quality of life at the end. So this isn't about dying. Dying and death are two different things, right? You can live right up until your last breath. So that would be my goal for all the patients I've taken care of, that they have the best quality end of life possible with, the least amount of pain and discomfort, and have things the way they want them. But if you don't articulate those things ahead of time, your chances of getting things the way you want is pretty, well, low. So that's where the planning comes in. I have my little library. This is my best of books right here on the desk. I figured I should bring my library to the library, and most of those books are listed on my handout. I have lots of handouts, actually, potentially, depending on what you all end up being interested in. And we are going to divide up and talk about things, talk amongst ourselves. Actually, we're a small enough group, we don't have to divide into anything. We can just talk. Because you have to talk about it to figure out what it is that you want, So that's by way of introduction. I've been thinking a lot about how to talk about this. So advanced care planning is what I like to call it. It's also called advanced directives. We're talking about advanced directives in this and the next session I'm doing in 2 weeks. And that includes the Health Care Proxy, your wishes, the MOLST form if that is appropriate for you to fill out, researching medically what's going on, all those kinds of things. All of that belongs under the umbrella of advanced directives. And we're all used to planning things, right? We planned, or our children planned, endlessly for the births of their children. And down to, okay, which hospital, and will it be a water birth, and do I want an epidural? And I mean, think about all the decisions that you make in anticipation of the birth of that child. And sometimes things don't go the way you were hoping, and you end up needing an emergency C-section, right? That happens. I had 2 home births because I would have had 2 car births had I tried to get to the hospital. So that's what worked really well for me. I'm really fast, apparently. But everyone's different. That's the other part that makes this, is the other reason why we all need to talk about it with our loved ones and come up with our own solution. Because what was best for me, I'll just say in terms of childbirth, horrifies most other people. Horrifies them. Thought of giving birth at home with no midwife present because she didn't make it in time for either birth. That would freak most people out. Fine by me. It worked for me. So it's the same with the end of our lives. We all want different things, and we can't know what those things are until we explore them ahead of time. Because if you wait until you're dying, it's often too late to get things the way you want, and that's a shame, and it's totally avoidable. So that's my mission. Mission possible. To get people to think about a few things ahead of time, so that if you have to get some ducks in a row in place ahead of time, that you've had, that we all have the time to do it, that you've taken the time to do it, okay? And to me, it's not depressing, and it's not like, to me it makes life better to have thought these things through and to discuss it with my healthcare proxy, who happens to be my husband. That's not always the best person to be your healthcare proxy, by the way, just as full disclosure. So my theory is that we spend tons more time planning our next vacation than we do the end of our lives, right? So what kinds of things go into it? Let's imagine you have a month off. Well, here's the story I came up with. It says, imagine your colleague tells you, oh yeah, I have a month off in July. Really? What are you going to do? I don't know. I haven't wanted to think about it. Well, what do you mean? Where are you going to go? I don't know. I guess I'll just get in the car and go somewhere. Well, where are you going to spend the night? I don't know. I'll just find a hotel that's open. I'm not good at Disney. Someone told me that was nice. I said, it's gonna take you 4 days to drive there, and you haven't reserved anything ahead of time. So you can just imagine thinking this person is certifiably insane, and that they're gonna waste their time, right? If you want a good vacation, what do? You do research, you figure out, oh, when I go to Italy, I wanna go to this restaurant, and I have to make a reservation 2 months in advance because it's overbooked all the time, or I wanna go to Paris and see the Louvre, or I don't wanna go to Paris, or whatever it is, right? Have all of you planned a trip like this at some point in your lives, or planned a wedding with or for children or other members of the family? So, there are a lot of details, and some of them we cannot foresee because we're all different and we just don't know how our lives are going to play out. We're all very complicated. Human beings are complicated. Physiology is complicated. But there are still things you can plan for in terms of the quality of your life. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. And trust me, we will have time to talk about it. I'm just grabbing my water here. All right. So, everybody, we're going to talk today about health care proxies. Do y'all know what a proxy is? It's a stand-in. It's a surrogate, right? And in this case, a healthcare proxy is someone who you have designated to make healthcare decisions for you if and when you are no longer able to do so yourself. So either you're in, God forbid, I'm going to say God forbid a lot because I don't want to ask for tempt fate, but let's say you're in a terrible car accident or you fall down your basement steps and you're knocked out and you don't wake up right away. A healthcare proxy would then be making decisions for you to the extent that you needed decisions made. Or if you should become too demented to put a sentence together and to understand the decisions that are being asked of you, then a healthcare proxy would be invoked. There are a lot of situations where a healthcare proxy would be invoked. Everybody 18 years and older should have a designated healthcare proxy. How many 18-year-olds do you think would be interested in considering their own deaths? But young people do get into car accidents. Just because you're young doesn't mean you can't get cancer or whatever. I mean, we just don't know when. Do you need to put your leg up?
No, it's all right. I just have to decide.
Okay.
But he may have to, you may have to get up, he has trouble sitting for long.
Good, walk around, do whatever you need to do. You have lots of space here to do that. So that's the first thing that surprised me, that 18 and over really needs a healthcare proxy, because until you're 18, your parents are your de facto healthcare proxies. But imagine if your child's away at college, or your grandchild's away at college, and something happens, they're not necessarily going to call mom and dad. Not necessarily, depending on the circumstances. So it's really good to have taken care of designating one before you might need it. And you might never, your healthcare proxy might never be invoked. You might never need anyone to speak for you, ever. Just like you might never be in a car accident that really requires you to need a seatbelt. But do we buckle them anyway when we get in the cars? Yes, we do. And why do we do that? Because it's a good idea.
Because an accident is not planned.
And yes, and why do we wear helmets when we ride bicycles? Because a head injury is far worse than wearing a stupid helmet that wrecks our hair. So it's the same with a healthcare proxy is like a seatbelt. Like I said, you might never need it, but if you do, it's too late to put it on, to put the belt buckle on once the car's crashed. And once you are no longer able to speak for yourself, and especially if you're demented, it's too late to appoint a healthcare proxy. It's just too late. So you really don't want to miss an opportunity to do something really simple. I have the forms here. You can download them from the internet. It doesn't require a lawyer. You can change your mind at any time. It's about as simple, it's a lot easier than getting a driver's license. Okay, so there's almost no impediment at all to filling out the paperwork so that you have a healthcare proxy. Have I made my point?
So once you've done that, what do you do with the paper?
Give it to the healthcare proxy. Make gazillion copies. I have one in my glove box in my car.
Oh, that's something.
Isn't that a good place?
Yeah.
Well, no, we were each other's proxies, and we have the second and third ones and all of that, but we have it sitting in home.
Not a good idea. I mean, home is fine, but you should make a gazillion copies, and everybody who is one of your proxies should have a copy. Because they're the ones who'll need it.
The proxy has to have a copy, and you're thinking like put it in the car.
Why not? So it's there.
and-
It says, I mean, you might be driving to a hospital and, then you guys will have it for each other, right?
Mhm.
You can also file one with the hospital that you live nearest to, at your primary care office or your specialist, especially if you have some kind of advanced illness like cancer or whatever, you could have one with your oncologist. But the best place to have it is on your person and or on the healthcare proxies person themselves. Because if they go, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I'll just say, let's say I'm in the hospital and I'm unconscious. If my husband comes in with the healthcare proxy form saying that I have designated him, then he just lays that down and says, I'm here to talk about my wife's care. I am her proxy. And then it's a legal document. That's the best way to get someone to pay attention. People complain all the time about, the hospitals ignore the forms. Yes, they ignore the forms because they're busy, because they don't always find them, because we have a stupid healthcare system where everything isn't centralized in one computer base for the whole country. It's not like France where you have your card and they put it in a machine and your whole healthcare record is right there. And then they add stuff and then that's, then you take your card to the next place and it's a complete record that you have like a credit card. We unfortunately don't even from hospital to hospital talk to each other. It's ridiculous. Just accept it and deal with it. And one of the ways you deal with it is you make sure you have your paperwork. It's really simple to make copies. Most of us have copy machines at our disposal. Make 10 or 15 copies of it and just put them everywhere you can think of. That's my strong recommendation. And that's a 15-cent solution, okay? All right, so before we get further with this, I just want to talk a little bit about why is it that we need a healthcare proxy? People didn't need proxies as much even 50 years ago, and especially 100 years ago.
HIPAA.
Say it again?
HIPAA.
Well, HIPAA's another reason, maybe, but that's not what I'm thinking of. HIPAA's the Health Insurance Portability and Privacy Act. The real reason we need healthcare proxies is because there are so many medical possibilities to keep us alive that weren't in existence, until between 1960 and 1980. We didn't even have intensive care units until we had ventilators and we, could transplant hearts and we had CPR and, the ability to shock people's hearts back into the proper rhythm and pacemakers and all that stuff. There are great reasons for using everything I just mentioned, and there's more. There's chemotherapy, there's internal defibrillators, there are antibiotics of all strengths and sizes, there's radiation, there's joint replacement, there are pharmaceuticals, for every little tiny thing that could prolong your life. It doesn't mean you're living, it just means you're alive, right? So we have to choose. We have to choose. Do we want dialysis? And for how long? Do we want to be intubated? Do we want any of those things? And the default is, if we don't say, No, I don't think so. You're gonna get everything that they think you need to keep you alive when you present yourself at a hospital. You don't even know it, but you're saying yes to all the things. Because that's the way medicine works. It wants to keep you alive. And as long as they feel like they have a modality that can treat you, by God, they're gonna treat you. Okay? So it's not like a restaurant where you say, oh, I want this and I want that, but not this, and then that. You get everything unless you say no, 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 no.
So many people want everything too.
So many do. That's another issue, and we're going to talk about that, but you're absolutely right. So that was one of my first surprises, was just clicking into realizing, so you have to say no. You have to know what you're saying yes to. And often, if you really understood that choice, you'd say, oh, heck no. Dad didn't want to be hooked up to all those machines, and then what happens? He's hooked up to all those machines somehow. It's challenging. It's challenging. If you want to die naturally, that's virtually impossible. It's really hard, unless you die in your sleep. But if you're in a hospital, dying naturally is that's hard work. You need a proxy who's going to be there and working it for you. Okay? So in summary, I don't want to say I love hospitals. They do great work. They save lives. People live long, productive existences after their hospital experiences, sometimes. And then there are terrible things that happen in hospitals, like the 89-year-old heavily demented person who's got his third bout of aspiration pneumonia this year and is in the ICU again on a vent. To me, that's a tragedy. And it's a preventable one. But it happens all the time because it's the default. If no one says otherwise, we call 911, and as soon as they're in that ambulance, it all starts happening. So you have choices to make further back in the line. Here's a metaphor. I love metaphors because I think they're helpful, like my vacation metaphor. So here's another one. And you guys are all old enough to have experienced this, I think. How many of you have driven from the Northeast, like let's say from Maine or New Hampshire, you're on 495, and you're trying to get off at the Leominster exit of Route 2?
And is it?
And missed it, right? How many of you have missed it?
Oh, yeah.
I've missed it, and this is pre-GPS.
Yeah.
But it's like there's this Bermuda Triangle of signage, and you know it's coming, and you're like, okay, I'm looking for it, and then if you look away at just the wrong moment, you realize I have sped past it, and you cannot turn around to go back. It's not worth it. So what do you have to do? You have to go all the way to the turnpike, and then go up 91 that way. Now, will you get to your destination? Yes, you will. But is it the way you want to go? Not always. It's the long way around. You have to pay tolls. It's, so even if you plan to go Route 2, which I have done several times, you can miss it if you're not paying attention. That's what advanced directives are like. They're to try to help you avoid missing those turns. And that means you have to recognize the turns. And we don't always get a lot of help to do that. Doctors don't even always help us because they don't always recognize death when it's coming. Until 24 hours before, they'll say, oh, we're done. We have nothing more to offer your patient. Say goodbye because in 48 hours they'll be dead. Meanwhile, the family's like, you mean there's no hope anymore? Yesterday there was hope. You were going to try X, Y, and Z. And they're like, no, we tried that. Didn't work. That happens all the time. Doctors don't like death. It's failure for them. They love you guys. They love their patients. They don't want to see you die. And they're probably freaked out by death too. That's probably why some doctors become doctors, right? So figuring out which exit you might want to get off at, and then recognizing it ahead of time so you can get off of it. That's the goal. And some people just say, nope, take me to the ICU. That's what they want. If I were in a car accident tomorrow, I would want to go to the ICU. I would want them to throw everything at me because I'm otherwise healthy, and I think there's a good chance I would recover, right? If in a week I'm still, on life support and the doctor would say, nope, brain, too much brain damage, then take me off. But, so that's a nuanced instruction, right? How do you write that down? You can't. How many of you have living wills, by the way?
We do.
All right. Do you know that it's no longer a legally recognized document in the state of Massachusetts?
No.
It hasn't been for quite some time, and it's actually, I think, a good idea. Because most living wills are too general, and they can't cover every little thing. I mean, is it going to cover if you have cancer, if you have a car accident, if you have sepsis, if you have this, if you have that? We can die a million ways. So that's why Health Care Proxy is really, really invaluable, because that's a person with a brain and a mouth. And they're going to use both of them to carry out your wishes. Now, the living will could be sort of an adjunct instructive document for the healthcare proxy in case they're just sitting there like, I don't know what to do. What did she want me to do? And then they can read it and it says, remember, ours is a little bit like that. We have an instructional page of our wishes for our son, who's our secondary, he's our alternate healthcare proxy, to kind of let him know, all right, remember, this is what we talked about. And it actually says at one point, you may not want to do this, you may not agree with this, but these are our wishes and we expect you to carry them out. It's not because I doubt, it's not because he wouldn't try to carry them out, but it's just to give him the confidence to do what could be quite difficult, because we don't want to be kept alive a long time on machines, It's like, where's the plug? Let's pull it. And that's hard. That would be hard for any child to do, especially a tender-hearted sweetheart like my son. But he understands what our wishes are, and he's willing to do it. So the living will, or whatever ancillary letter or document you want to put with the healthcare proxy, can be kind of an encouragement or a reminder to your healthcare proxy. But no doctor's going to look at it. They don't have the time. Imagine what you'd have to write, how many pages you'd have to write to cover every little eventuality. And you'd need a darn good index so they could say, all right, wait, sepsis, okay, page 81. Or, oh no, car accident, traumatic brain injury, page 12. It's like, no one is going to do that. It's too time consuming.
But doesn't the MOLS form go into that kind of detail?
MOLS form is different detail, and we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I can just briefly say, I'm getting a little off task here, but that's okay, because it's really important information. Do you all know what code status is? You know what code status is, because you're a nurse. All right, you've heard like code blue, code red over the loudspeakers. All right, but your code status means, are you a full code? Do you want them to throw everything at you? CPR if you need it, a vent if you need it, dialysis if you need it, tube feeding, intravenous, blah, blah, blah. Do you want all those things to be used on you if necessary? Or do you want to say no to any of those? And if you say no to any of them, then you're a partial code. And if you say no to all of it, which many people do at the end of their lives, then you're a no code. Now, everyone in the medical profession, when they're taking your records or something, they want to know, what's your code status? And most people, I'll just say right now, I'm full code. At this moment in time, I'm 60, I'm in good health, I have no chronic diseases. If I fell down right now because my heart was, because I'm an AFib or VFib, God forbid, I would want someone, you maybe, to do compressions on me to get, and someone else to call 911. All right? No, I'm fine. But I would want that because I think there's a good chance of my survival. You have to understand though, CPR, which looks really like a walk in the park. You watch Grey's Anatomy and it's like 60% of people are fine afterwards and it's just a couple of boom, boom, boom. No, it can, if you're a little old lady, a twig with osteoporosis, it can break your ribs. You could end up getting, a punctured lung and pneumonia. And it's a handful of percentage of the population that actually it recovers to any sense of where they were before that event when they have CPR. And if they've gone for a while, if they've been lying there for a while, you don't know how long, and then you do CPR, forget it. because they've been without oxygen to their brain for so long. So CPR can save lives. It can also prolong lives in the worst way possible. So at a certain point, a lot of people say, no, I'm DNR. Do not resuscitate. So that's something you can indicate on the MOLST form. The MOLST form is the way to say no to things, all right? And most of us here in this room might not be ready to say no at this moment to any of those things. But if you become sick, or let's say, you go in with an infection and it becomes septic and you really are quite desperately ill, you might change. You might say, yes, I want to fill out a MOLST form now. And what's really amazing is your healthcare proxy can fill one out on your behalf. Oh. So even if you're unconscious, so you don't have to feel like, oh my God, I've missed the boat if I haven't filled out the MOLST form. The MOLST form's not appropriate for most people anyway, right now. It's for the foreseeable, all of these things are for the foreseeable future, right? So what does that mean? It means you have to revisit this frequently.
I was gonna say, it sounds like you have to keep adjusting it as you grow older.
I couldn't say it better myself. Absolutely. You tweak it. So in 10 years at least, I'm going to be, my husband and I talk about this all the time, because between my jobs and his preoccupation with retirement and everything else, we're always, I worked on Alzheimer's units for so long and brought home stories. And like if he starts going, it's like, oh my God, do I have to hear again? But it's really important. If you have a major health change, like you're diagnosed with cancer, or you find out you have congestive heart failure, or fill in the blank, that would be a good time to review your MOLST form again. Maybe you have lung problems and you develop really terrible pneumonia and you get put on a vent for 4 or 5 days just to give your lungs a chance to recover. After that, you might say, don't ever put me on a frickin' vent again. Never. You might. Or you might say, you know what, for 4 days it was worth it, because now it allowed me to heal. So as temporary measures, all the things on the MOLST form can be life-saving and wonderful. It's when they start hanging out forever. You've all heard of Terry Schiavo, right? None of us would know Terry Schiavo's name if she had filled out a healthcare proxy. Her husband and her parents were fighting over whether to remove her feeding tube, and her husband said, I know she wouldn't want this. And her parents said, but we don't care what her condition is. She's our daughter, we love her. They were very Catholic. They believe strongly in the sanctity of life, so for them it didn't matter that she was just, in a permanent vegetative state.
Her husband couldn't override.
It went to court so many times. Well, no, based on what?
It was Florida.
Because even though he was her husband, he wasn't her.
Well, her parents were her parents, and so yeah, her feeding tube was removed 3 times and put back twice.
She finally died after a few years.
She did. It took a long time for her to die.
What was her original? Was it
20 years.
Was the problem?
She had heart failure. She was anorexic. She was trying to do a diet thing, and she, I think, had a heart attack. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. There were 3, Nancy Cruzan, I can't think of the second one, and then Terry Schiavo, who are all famously part of the reason that we now have advanced directives that are so clearly delineated. Because in what Nancy Cruzan's case, she was in a persistent vegetative state, and her parents agreed that to remove the feeding tube, but she was in a Catholic hospital and they refused. So that's where you move to a different hospital, okay? Just saying. Health Care Proxy would say, packing her up. We're gonna find a different solution here. And you have to research that ahead of time. You don't always know what nursing homes or what hospitals will honor whatever wishes that you have. You need to research those things in advance. If you know this is my choice, then you can't even assume that your doctor will agree with you. There have been cases where people have discussed it with their doctors and the doctors say, but then the doctor still puts in the pacemaker or whatever because that's their belief. Doctors don't have to go against their own ethical beliefs in caring for patients. Like with physician-aided death, In Vermont, and other states, all the, like Oregon and Washington and California all have that legal now. Doctors are not obligated to provide you with that if they are ethically against it. The hope is that they will refer you to another doctor who would help you. But anyway, you cannot make assumptions with these things. It's way too important. So at the risk of feeling like, okay, I might be repeating myself, or, do it.
Despite all this, it sounds like it's a little bit of a free-for-all, though. Our daughter is RN, and she says that often enough, despite proxies, the families come in and override all that, and the doctors just keep on keeping people alive.
I think your proxy has to be mouthy.
I guess.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. So one of the things I handed out were the qualities of a good healthcare proxy. So let's look at this. We are going to talk about wishes at end of life too, because, at least a little bit. Did I not? The guide to help? No, it's this one.
Okay, it's probably good.
It's on over on the table. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to exclude you. So I think this is a really good guide for your healthcare proxies. And this is written by a doctor who's saying, here's what I'd like you to do. Ask me to explain things you don't understand. Don't feel like, oh God, I'm an idiot. I don't know what, a G-tube is, or a urostomy, or whatever. Say, please explain to me what that is. You can't agree to something if you don't understand what it is, right? And then summarize it back to them so that they're sure, so that they can know that they've communicated correctly to you. It's like communication 101. And just because they're doctors and perhaps a little intimidating and acting like they have no time for you, tough. Ask them, right? Request, if you want it in writing or you want a picture or a video, you can usually Google everything. The Google is wonderful. This is, to me, the most important thing. So if you're making decisions for and or about somebody and you're doing it on their behalf, ask for the best case, the worst case, and the most likely scenario. Because it's one thing if someone says, oh yes, have this surgery, I've done this 1,000,000 times, it'll be great. You say, hold on, will they be able to walk? Ask the pertinent questions, because that's, like, the surgery isn't the issue. It's how are they going to be after the surgery or whatever intervention it is. How do we think they're going to be? And it's all based on probabilities, and there are no certainties, but that's our job always, is to make decisions based on the best information we have at the moment. There's a famous story I think Atul Gawande talks about it in Being Mortal. One of his mentors at Harvard, she's an oncologist, and she does palliative care. And she was taking care, her father had a tumor on his spine, I think, and needed surgery, and she was his proxy. So she's with him in California, and she had just left him at the hospital. The surgery was going to be possibly the next day. They were doing an exploratory and then decide what to do. And she's halfway across the Golden Gate Bridge, and she's like, I didn't really have the talk with him. Like, I don't really know what he wants. I know what I think he should want, but I really don't know what he wants. She turned around, went back, said, Dad, I need to ask you some questions. And she said, it was not the easiest conversation she had, but she said, for you, what is quality of life? And he said, and this guy's a professor who's written books and whatever. He said, if I can sit in my chair and eat ice cream and watch the Red Sox, I would want that. And she's like, I didn't even know my father watched sports, right? It's her own dad, and she didn't know that. So the next day, she knew what questions to ask. Will my father be able to eat ice cream and sit in his easy chair and watch the baseball game? And the doctor said yes. So she went ahead with the surgery, and her father actually lived a number of years after that, wrote at least one more book. She said, I don't know if I would have agreed to the surgery had I not had that conversation with the doctor, with my father ahead of time to clarify his wishes. So we think we know each other, right? But my hairdresser, I happened to go in one day and her father had just died suddenly of a heart attack in the middle of the night. She said, we didn't even know if he wanted to be cremated or buried. No one had talked to him about it. None of us kids knew. Seems like a no-brainer. You ought to be able to figure that one out, right? I mean, and think of how stressful it is in an already stressful situation to have to try to figure out, oh my God, I don't know what they wanted. So one of the messages for why we do advanced directives and why we talk to our healthcare proxies and clarify our wishes is it's a gift to our loved ones. We're lifting a burden from them because it's one less thing they have to wonder about, did I do it right? Did I make the right decision? And we never know really if we made the right decision, really, because we can't undecide and see how it would turn out if we decided otherwise. But at least you feel like you're guided by their wishes. And that's the whole point of a healthcare proxy. You're not making your decisions based on what you want for them. You're making your wishes in their voice for them, for what they want, right? And that's hard, and not all of us can do that for each other. I did a workshop once, and there was a hospice nurse sitting there who I really like. I knew her well. And she got this look on her face as I was talking about the qualities of a healthcare proxy. She's like, oh my God. I said, what? She said, my husband's my healthcare proxy, but I have to change that. It has to be my sister. My husband can't be my healthcare proxy. He can't do what I want him to do. Because he's too, I always say, don't choose the person who couldn't put down the dog to be your healthcare proxy if what you want is not to linger a long time with a lot of interventions. Right? I know. Well, right? So sometimes your spouse is the right person to be your healthcare proxy. Sometimes your spouse is absolutely the wrong person. And you're not always going to be reciprocal healthcare proxies to each other. It could be that the wife is the husband's proxy and someone else is the wife's proxy. For all kinds of reasons. There are families where they say, all three of my children are the healthcare proxy together. Yeah. It can work, but it can also backfire on you because the least common denominator will prevail. If one of them says, no, I don't want that for mom, keep the feeding tube in, they'll keep the feeding tube in. They will. So it's better to disappoint the other kids and just have one be the primary. If you're having a child be your health, and having a nurse, it's kind of nice.
That's who his is.
Say what?
That's who his is. His is our youngest. So.
Yeah, right. Our younger child is the healthcare proxy. Our older child's like, how come I'm not that? I said, Erica, here's what you'd have to do. She's like, oh, thank God you chose yours. So, and not everyone is relieved, but one of the books that I have says nobody knows how hard it is to be a healthcare proxy until they're there. You have to make decisions fast and in a state of stress and anxiety and sadness and chaos sometimes. That's another reason why it's really good to consider it now, in the peace of the moment. You can just really devote yourself without any, well, there's a little stress, right? Because you're thinking about dying. But you can be very clear. And you can keep coming back to it and refining it and, really come up with a good plan for yourself. And some of that involves doing research, right? How many of you have been proxies for anybody? Okay. And do all of you have proxies?
Mm-hmm.
And how many of you have been involved with, say, parents who've died? You've been at their bedside or you've been part of the decision-making for their care?
Not parents,
or
aunts and uncles.
Grandparents or aunts and uncles or anybody like that in the family. So some of us have a sense of maybe what a good death looks like or what we'd like to avoid and for ourselves. but not all of us do. So that's why there are tons of great books. There are more and more all the time that I recommend highly. I have them on my fancy handout. So if you're at a loss for wondering, like, I don't know what I want when I die, do some reading and research, and it will help guide you, perhaps, where you'll say, oh yeah, that would be cool. And there are other tools too, and we'll get to that. I'm kind of jumping ahead.
You know what my husband says? He says, if you get so bad, put him down. He says,
Yeah.
just shoot me and let me drop into the garden and compost. These are big gardeners.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's so illegal.
Yeah, I know.
But it would be lovely. Dying is hard. It's hard to engineer. There are gentler ways of doing it though. My mom was the same way. She used compost in our garden actually. Her ashes. That's what she wanted. So anyway, this is a great guide for healthcare proxies, I think. It's at least a good start. So what we're going to talk about now, you all have healthcare proxies, and so here's one thing that often goes on people's list. How many of you would like to die at home? If possible. That takes advanced planning. It really does. Because the default is if you call 911, you're not going to, it's hard to get released to die at home. So, it takes advanced planning. It's doable and it's wonderful, but you have to plan it in advance. Code status, I mentioned that already, to figure out, and that's a most form issue that I'll go into detail about in 2 weeks. Because if you don't indicate no to certain modalities, you're going to get everything on the menu that you need to keep you alive. All right, so healthcare proxy. Do you all have this form to see what it looks like?
We got something from our lawyer.
You might have a healthcare power of attorney from your lawyer. It's the
Yeah.
same, doesn't matter
Same?
which. Yeah, doesn't matter. It has to be witnessed by 2 people who are not listed as proxies. You fill it out. Your proxy doesn't have to sign anything, just you and your 2 witnesses. And once it's signed, then it's they are legally your proxies. And you can change your mind at any time, just like with any will. Whichever one's the most recent one is the one that trumps the other ones. You might have to change your mind. It's really good to have a proxy who lives nearby or who can be available to be near you if you're ill.
He has his, the first proxy is me, but his second proxy is his daughter who lives in Idaho. But I guess,
Well, there are pluses and minuses to that. And they have, we live in the age of cell phones, which is wonderful, so we can usually reach people pretty quickly, and reaching someone by phone works. If someone's critically ill in the hospital, you kind of want to keep an eye on them. You kind of need to. So the ideal is if your healthcare proxy can be right there. Sort of like, if your wife is giving birth to the baby, you don't just go out and have coffee or stay in Idaho. You want to be right there, right? Because decisions have to get made.
No.
Decisions might have to be made, or you don't want to miss it. You don't know. You don't always know how long it's going to take, right? It could take hours. It could take days. It could take minutes. So that's the ideal, the preferred ideal, that your healthcare proxy be someone who lives closer.
our form from our lawyer is fine though.
Sure, it's
Yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
it doesn't, usually you have to pay, we actually have healthcare power of attorney as well, because when we did our wills with our lawyer, we just had him draw it up. But this, download it, print off the internet, sign it, in 2 minutes it's done if you have 2 extra people to sign as witnesses, and then you're all set. So anyone you know who's 18 or over, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, tell them they need a healthcare proxy. So how does your healthcare proxy know what you want?
All of us association.
You have to talk with them about it. You really do. They have to know your wishes or they can't carry them out, even if they're kind of psychic, right? All right, so I think it's useful, instead of trying to imagine ourselves as 90-year-old feeble people, to use the car accident scenario. Like if I were, I'll just say me because that's easier. If I were in a serious car accident and had a traumatic brain injury, would I want to be, what would I want? Would I want to be kept alive for a long time on vents and tubes if it looked like I wasn't going to be myself anymore? You know, I might be very impaired and or just a vegetable, for want of a better word, in a persistent vegetative state. Would I want that? I know that I would not. I'm just speaking for myself. And so I would want them to give it a chance, because brains, if they're bonked around, they take a while for the swelling to go down, and but give it a week or two, and then if the doctor, you ask what's the best case, the worst case, and the most likely scenario, and if the doctors say it's not looking very good, then I'm done. Then I want my healthcare proxy to fill out the most form, say I'm a do not do anything, and I'd want everything pulled. And the healthcare proxy is legally allowed to do that. It's not hard, it shouldn't be harder to remove vents and tubes and stuff just because they're already in place. So you don't have to avoid doing it to begin with and feel like, oh my God, once I have the vent in, I'll never get it out. Do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to be afraid that once we go down that path that there's no walking it back. If you have a healthcare proxy who knows your wishes, then you absolutely can. It might not be easy. You might have to find a doctor who will agree. In worst case scenario, you might have to switch hospitals. I mean, there are cases where that kind of draconian, action is necessary, and that's why healthcare proxies have to be, what did you say earlier?
Mouthy.
Mouthy. They have to be confident people who are not fazed by authority, and who will question authority, and who will say, excuse me, but no, that is not what my husband wants. Here is what he wants. So let's talk about how we're going to accomplish this.
Unless they give you a good reason. for
Well,
not.
and see, that's the thing. You have a dialogue. A piece of paper, your living will cannot have a dialogue, right? It's just, it might even be saying something totally irrelevant and pointless. The healthcare proxy, yes, with additional information, they might say, look, this antibiotic is a really serious one, but if we clear up this infection, then her brain will clear, and her thoughts will come back, and her organs will start working again, and then we'll see what happens. Let's try that. You can still say yes or no, but know what you're saying yes and no to. That to me is the most important thing, right? So that means you have to ask questions about it, right? Because this is the weird thing. We think that we know what the doctors and the emergency room people mean when they're talking, and they think they know what we mean when we're talking, but it's like we're speaking two different languages. And we have two different sets of priorities, because they're just about keeping you alive. And you, as the healthcare proxy, are about quality of life, I think. That's what I'm about anyway, right? If it were just about staying alive as long as possible, we have a lot of people on vents and tubes in persistent vegetative states, warehouse somewhere, right? So how can they know what the quality of life issues are? They don't really care that much, probably, and everybody's is different. So being able to articulate that and ask the questions that will help you achieve that are the key. So it has to be somebody who's inquisitive, who's curious, who's persistent. So sometimes it's your pain in the butt child who never shuts up. That would be a really good healthcare person who's not going to give up and say, but wait, I don't understand this. Tell me again. Maybe find a different doctor to ask. Whatever it takes, right? Because this is life and death. It's really important, and it's quality of life. It's not just life. You cleverly noted that if it's about the foreseeable future, that we need to revisit and tweak and talk again and again as things change, as we age, as we perhaps become infirm. We have to adjust our expectations and our wishes, right? And our healthcare proxy will not know that unless we tell them. I've already talked about living wills, that they're a decent guide, but they're of no use to a hospital. No hospital cares about living wills anymore. They just don't. They, I think, correctly recognize that they don't have the time, and they can be misinterpreted. Remember, I was talking about how my wish was, okay, for short term, you can put me on a vent. Let's say I have terrible, I got the bird flu or something, and I just can't breathe. I'm like that, and I really need help. And in 3 days, the idea is that in 3 days or so, I can get off the vent and my lungs will have had a chance to recover. Well, if you're a do not do anything in your living will and say no extraordinary measures, they might not do that. They might say, oh, look here, it says she doesn't want to vent. Even if it could be for a short amount of time and save my life, and I'm only 60 and I'd kind of like to live to see my grandchildren, A piece of paper can't be nuanced like a healthcare proxy can.
I was going to say, how do you divine all these nuances that could possibly happen? You can't, right?
You can't, not on paper you can't.
That was generalities.
And that's why, see, even with a vacation, if you said, you go to the travel agent and you want them to plan it, and you say, I want a really nice, relaxing vacation.
What's
Are
the
you gonna get,
definition of
yes!
relaxing
What's your
vacation?
definition? Do you like mountains? Do you like ocean? Do you like the beach? Do you wanna be in the middle of the woods? Like, there are details there, right? You could end up with a crappy vacation because it's her definition of a really nice, relaxing vacation. She might think Disney is wonderful. I would just wanna, I wouldn't go.
So that really is where the continuing conversation and choosing somebody that can think outside of what their wishes are.
Well, that's like the first and most important thing. It's not about the proxy's wishes for you. It's about them carrying out your wishes for you. And so
being able to extrapolate from what they do know in the
Right.
conversations you have had
right.
about other things that you hadn't talked about.
So perhaps a helpful document would be to say, here's the quality of life, here are my quality of life parameters, To not try to talk about, oh, I want to vent for this many days, but not anymore. Like, what do we know? We're not doctors and we're not soothsayers. And the human body is a miraculous, amazing, complicated piece of work. So you lay out these parameters with your healthcare proxy, and you can use this as a help. I'm going to pass these around so you can see. Just to give you some ideas, so that you might have something to talk about. So these are called the Go Wish cards. Go Fish, except it's Go Wish. And you can do this online. You don't need to even have the physical cards. I think I list it in my list of resources. And it has all these different things that you might want at the end of your life. Like, I want to have a doctor who knows me as a person. I want to trust my doctor. Now, we don't always have doctors we can trust, but we can try, right? I want someone to listen to me. I don't want to be alone when I die. Now, some people plan it so everyone's out of the room when they go. Like,
Yeah.
everyone goes to pee, and one person goes to make a phone call, and the other one gets coffee, and boom, they're gone. So it happens sometimes. I want to maintain my dignity. I want my close friends near. I don't want to burden my family. I want to die in the hospital so I don't have to, that my family doesn't have to deal with all the mess. There are some people who would rather not die at home because they don't want to put people through that. I want to have my family prepared for my death. So what does that mean? You got to talk about it, right? I want to know how my body's going to change in the process of dying. So that means I want to have a talk with my doctor, I want to do some research, or I want to talk to my nursey daughter who can help me prepare for this. Some people don't want to know any of this, right? Dying at home. You might want to have a chaplain or your pastor or clergy person. You might want to have last rites. You might want to have a Buddhist dying and ceremony. You might want to have a big funeral. You might want to be cremated. You might want to be buried. There are all these things to choose from of what's important. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to be in pain. That's a biggie. None of us.
Bring on the meds.
Yeah, that's right. Roxanol. Give me Roxanol and liquid Ativan. I can perform miracles.
Oh, why?
To have an advocate who knows my values and priorities, I would say that's what we're talking about right now. So it's not their values and priorities, it's my values and priorities. And that's going to guide who you choose, right? Because not everybody who loves you and cherishes you is going to advocate for your wishes and values. They might advocate for their own because they love you so much, right? So you kind of have to just think to yourself, so what are some other good qualities that you could think of that a proxy might have? What would be important for them to possess as a quality?
Patience.
Patience, sure.
Having a bit younger than you might be a good idea.
Well,
Just thinking
yeah,
about
otherwise you have to keep changing your proxy.
Changing it, yeah.
Because if your spouse is your proxy and your spouse dies before you or becomes demented or whatever, then yeah, you need a new proxy. So yeah, having them younger than you would tend in the direction of not needing to choose a new one all the time, but you never know.
Never know.
Because we never know when we're gonna die. What else? That's all right.
Not having children, which I don't, it just puts another spin on the whole thing of who you have as your proxy. So,
It does.
like when we did our will just recently for the third time, you change it all the time. When we're talking about all these issues, it was hard to come up with the secondary, like we did each other and I did
Sure.
my brother, but my husband, who's he gonna do? So we did our friend who's our age. She doesn't live too far away, she's in Eastern Mass, but we'll probably have to revisit that.
You
is that the
might.
best
And
person?
hopefully and some people never need a proxy. Some people don't. These are, I think, are really important ones too. So not being a burden to my family, and that could mean not being an emotional burden, not being a physical burden, not being a financial burden to my family. So for some people that's of primary importance, right? To have my funeral arrangements made ahead of time. So no one has to think, you can write your obituary ahead of time, you can
Oh,
have.
yeah, one of my friends did that, it was so great.
Yeah!
I have to do it, I haven't done it.
You should, right, and to go to the funeral home now, pick out the car, because those are all stressful things that tend to get very expensive in the heat of the moment when everybody's exhausted and grieving, it's gonna happen anyway, figure it out ahead of time.
I want to have a green burial, and that's not a simple thing.
It's
I'm
not.
not done with the research.
Check out Brattleboro, a friend of mine,
Brattleboro.
is trying to get a green cemetery set up.
Yeah. But there's a group here, I think in Greenfield, they were at these isolated places, but.
Yeah, I would like that too.
I went to one of the Quakers in Leverett. It was really interesting.
Where were they buried?
Right there.
Okay, there are a couple of towns, Conway
I don't know
allows
if you
it.
have to be a Quaker.
But you have to be a resident of that town
Yeah, exactly,
sometimes.
exactly.
Well-
Amherst Wildwood Cemetery, but I don't know that they wouldn't take me probably because I'm from Florence.
So again, research, really important, and advocating for what you want. To have your financial affairs in order, not being
For
connected,
doing this.
not being connected to machines. Now this is a pretty vague one.
Yeah.
Because there are some times, that's why you have a nuanced discussion with your healthcare proxy, so Like, it would be okay for a few days, like, okay, if I need an IV, whatever, but maybe not a feeding tube, or there are good reasons to do all of these things, and there are terrible reasons to do all of these things. So you have to figure out if there's a good or a bad reason, and then make your decision based on that. And it'll be different for everybody, and you're all just gonna do the best you can do. You know, you can't beat yourself up. You have to go with the information that you have at that moment and make your decision. And sometimes you'll see in retrospect, I should have done that 2 months earlier, or, you know, but we're human and we don't know. So we do the best that we can.
They should have made all those decisions because they went through all that pain and doubt anyways.
Yeah,
Is that,
right,
which is
right.
an expense and
So think about it for a moment. What are the most important things that you would want to have accomplished if your time should become short? So let's say you get a prognosis where it says, you know, you're still feeling pretty good, but it's like, you know, the foreseeable future is like 6 months, let's say. What all would you suddenly want to do? Or what all of a sudden would you do if you had short time? And not this feeling of like, oh, I've got 25 years ahead of me, or whatever it is.
Talk.
Well, some of us we're not thinking of 6 months, but we know it's going to be under 20 years,
Right.
you know?
Okay, so I guess what
So
I'm
it's-
asking is
there's
what's
a
on your
red line.
Yeah.
what's on your bucket list?
Yeah.
I need to make one.
So just think, you gotta be able to, I'm assuming you can come up with at least 1 or 2 things that would be on your bucket list. So think about it for a moment. And then I'm gonna ask you all to say something that's on your bucket list. And it can be something really simple. It doesn't have to be profoundly amazing. It's just something that really means something to you. You wanna go first?
I guess, my bucket list for that includes what my wife wants me to do, and that's finish a book.
Finish writing one?
One that I'm doing now.
So you'd like to, so
It
finishing?
summarizes his life's work.
Well, that sounds like
And if he
it's,
doesn't do it, people aren't gonna know all of the things that.
all right, so you're gonna go home and start writing,
Mhm.
right?
I'll finish it.
My bucket list is, right now, is urgent because we're in the process of redoing our wills. And, I found out a terrible problem, I mean, wonderful problem I have, is that I have more money than I thought I did.
Mhm.
And I want to leave it to,
Sure.
to some nonprofits, and it's not,
So you have to figure out if you're gonna do a trust or whatever, yeah.
well, you know, which groups and I don't know when that's gonna go into effect also, so I obviously have to pick groups that I feel are gonna be going on for, there, and
You can always revisit that part of your will.
that's
in
true,
10 years.
yeah.
You know, nothing, that's what's great about all this, nothing is engraved in stone. You can change your mind about just about everything, except if you haven't designated a healthcare proxy before you lose consciousness, that, you've lost that opportunity.
Right,
You know,
right.
could I just say that when we did our will, I have a lot going to various charities.
Right.
And percentages.
Yes,
There is a part of the will that says if X, Y, Z, like Doctors Without Borders goes out of business, then it gets split.
Reapportioned differently.
right, right,
So it's not,
I was thinking of that
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
yeah.
And I'm sure your lawyer could have a suggestion for how to do that.
things are about business, so.
They do,
It's a thought.
they do.
But it's not a problem.
How about you? You have something on your bucket list?
Yeah, if I had 6 months to live, I would want to get together with the extended family at the lake.
Yeah. Have a big reunion.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun.
Sweet, a lovely.
How about you? You got
Yeah, right. I don't have anything terribly magnificent, you know?
I preface this by saying nothing. It could be saying goodbye, saying thank you, healing a family rift. You know, if there's misunderstanding between you and someone in the family, that might be really important. Like, you know, I want my kids to get along. I want, you know, doesn't have to be like world peace or.
No. Yeah, it's just I don't really think in those terms all the time, but I think probably just traveling to someplace in Italy that I'd like to go, like Cinque Terre or
Where?
Sorrento.
Cinque Terre, I'd love to go
You know,
there too.
Me too.
Oh,
Somewhere, you know, that I haven't been, that would be fun, but, you
Take
know,
much.
take all the junk out of the house, get a dumpster.
No. You have 6 months left. Don't waste your time emptying out the house. Do something fun.
yeah, actually, the Swedes have this idea of death cleaning, and I keep thinking I really need, you know, at this point, if I went tomorrow, somebody would need it.
Well, and see,
Yeah, totally.
this again falls in the category of easing the burden for your family or whoever it is who's gonna clean up stuff for you. My mother-in-law fortunately did that before she moved out of her home of 55 years. I did it for my parents, it was a big pain. But, you know, someone had to do it. So it is a gift. It's a gift to your loved ones to put your affairs in order like that. How about you? Do you have something from your bucket list you'd like to share?
Yes, but, you know, so many things, like read every book in the house, I want to read, learn to play the guitar, travel, I mean, you know, yeah, I've had more parties, but I already have a lot.
So are you gonna wait until someone tells you you've got 6 months, or are you gonna start now?
I know that damn guitar, it's sitting there for a dozen years, but, yeah.
Do you know what I started learning? The mandolin.
No, that's fun, isn't it?
I did, yeah, it's great fun. I kind of pushed myself.
You do that.
My other idea, interestingly, on the bucket list thing is spend time sitting underneath a tree, one of my favorite trees.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, not very dramatic, but.
No, it's not, but how
But
much
do
do
you do it?
you get out of that? You get a lot out of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And
Or
that's
like if you
what-
want to do daily meditation, start tomorrow. Like, what are we waiting for? I always think there are things that you can start to do now that would improve the quality of your life all the way to the end. And if that means repairing your relationship with your loved ones, or, you know, cleaning up your house drawer by drawer and cupboard by cupboard because you got a lot of accumulated stuff, or finishing writing your memoirs, or putting your parents, I've got all my parents' memorabilia and the love letters they wrote to each other for when they were separated by an ocean for a year, that my father just threw in a file and never
That's one
got rid of.
thing.
It is, but it's gonna take me a while to put it all, because it's all just like dumped in a box. It's all out of order, like pictures and, so
Yeah.
there are 3 boxes in my attic that I wanna put in order this
Don't
summer.
we?
I'm not, well, I have to wait till this summer, but
Okay.
anyway, and wouldn't all of those things, like planning a trip to Italy, or, you know, getting your financial affairs in order, or writing a book or whatever, make you feel good now? It's not just about the very, 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 very end. I wanted to share something with you guys. I got a book at the book sale on Saturday. And of course, because I love to read and because I was in denial about all the other stuff I had to do, I read this biography of Julia Child. The end of her life is quite interesting. Now, she did not need to invoke a Health Care Proxy because she was in full command of her faculties to the end. But I thought this was good. So anyway, Julia Child had terrible problems with her knees all her life. Tons of pain, had a knee replacement, they kept getting infected. It was she was 6'3" and she was on her feet all the time. And very active, so she just way too much strain on her knees. So that was one of her problems. And then she developed congestive heart failure, all that bata. And she had breathing problems. I don't know if you ever saw her at the end of her life and those things, she could hardly make it through a sentence.
Yeah, she's pretty kind of fun.
She was. But she lived to be 92, right? And at the very end, even her kidneys weren't working well. They started to fail. So, and then the medication she was taking caused her to lose her sense of taste. Okay, yeah, right. We were all groaning in unison, because for her, that was like dying. That was her whole reason for being alive, was to be able to taste and enjoy food. So she stopped taking her meds.
Yeah.
Because like, there's no point in me being alive. She said, I have to taste the food, otherwise there's no point in sticking around. And you know, she started going to dialysis 3 days a week because her kidneys were failing, in the hopes that that would give her some more good days, and mostly she had bad days, because you feel like crap on dialysis days. It wipes you out. And she was pretty miserable, and you know, she ate a little bit too much fat, although now, of course, we know that fat is not the demon that it was. The cardiologist says, you have to stop eating butter, and then she says, oh, you silly boys, and they all laugh. So she had this wonderful meal of good onion soup. She wanted it done just like in her book, and the smell was wonderful, but then the next morning she was very, very sick. Her port for her dialysis had become infected, and she was septic. So she had the infection traveled into her bloodstream, and that becomes deadly very quickly. And the doctor said, if you're not treated immediately, you're going to die in 48 hours. She said, you mean kick the bucket? He said, yes. So she said, if we treat this and get rid of the infection, can you promise me that I'm going to get the energy level I had before this started? No, the doctor said. Then don't treat it, Julia said. So her family, you know, her niece or whoever it was who was taking care of her, she said, I'm not ready for you to go, and she was crying, you know, it's like, you know, Julia has hours to live. And Julia patted her hand and said, it's time, dearie, if I can't live the way I want to live, I'd rather not live at all. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a little nap. And I don't think she ever woke up from that nap.
Wow.
So I thought that was very timely. There was a reason that I had spent my time reading this book and enjoying it very much for that story. So if she had needed a healthcare proxy, I certainly hope her proxy would have made such a wonderful, you know, a really clear-headed. No, he had died and he had had dementia for quite a while. He was quite disabled with dementia. So she didn't need a proxy to make that decision, but it could just as easily have been that a proxy would have recognized.
Did she die at home?
No, she was in the hospital. I mean, she was already in the hospital with a sepsis, yeah. But she died very peacefully. Everybody came. You know, I take that back. I don't know. She might have been at home, actually. She might have been. It was very peaceful. All her friends who lived nearby came to say goodbye and held her hand.
Cambridge?
No, she was in California at that point. She had moved.
Do you know that her kitchen that came
Is in the
Cambridge
Smithsonian.
Yeah.
exhibit at the
I've seen it. I
Yeah, I saw
visited it.
The documentary about that.
Yeah.
You've seen it?
So there's one more story I wanted to tell you all, which kind of illustrates how important healthcare proxies are and how important it is to recognize the turns in the road before you pass them by, like the Leominster exit off of 495. Darn that exit. Now with GPS, I never miss it, but I've missed it at least once.
We did it 1 year and then the next year too, because after all, it was familiar to go right past it.
But isn't it weird? It's like, you know, it's like exit 45 or it's exit 44 or.
Littleton off
Littleton
495.
Air.
Yeah, and it's like I'm waiting, I'm seeing the numbers go down, I'm like, and I've still missed it. So this story I'm going to tell you happened at Charlene Manor, and I was expecting a new patient to come onto my unit, and it was going to be on my side of the unit, it was my patient, and I get this call. They said, your patient's in the lobby. I'm like, what do you mean he's in the lobby? He said, just go see. So I go in the lobby, and there's this guy who refuses to come in. Have you guys been in, you know, there's that huge atrium when you go into Charlene Manor. And he was not cooperating. He was dropping himself to the floor. We had 5 people holding on to him, trying to make progress, and he just would not let us move him. He had Lewy body dementia, which is very Parkinsonian. It's a type of dementia, but it has some of the motor issues that Parkinson's has. And he couldn't really speak very clearly anymore, but he was determined and strong. And we were all together, like, holding on to him for a good half hour in the lobby before it became clear that he was not going to be coming onto our unit, because he was just not going to let himself be put in a locked unit. Because it was a locked unit. And so as we're standing there with him, at one point, I just felt so horrible for him, and we're all perspiring profusely because it's like a greenhouse in there. So even though it was cold outside, it was hotter than the dickens. So we're all sweating, and we're all holding each other, sweating onto each other. And I looked at him and I said, "Bud, can I get you anything at all? Like, would you want a glass of water or something?" And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Just kill me. Just shoot me now." He said this to his face was this close to mine. And he was as serious as I've ever, it really, just catches your breath, like, this is real, it's not in a movie. So we called the EMTs and they came, and he ended up going to Henry Haywood ultimately, which has a serious psych unit. Yeah, because he would have been too much for us to deal with on our little unit. And I was concerned because I thought this man could live 10 more years. He seemed so muscular and so physically strong, and I just was sick at heart thinking of his life. And one of our aides happened to know the family, and she told me about 3 months later, she said, "Oh, that guy, he died." And I've seldom been so relieved and happy for somebody being released from what I think was hell for him. And at the time, after he was sent off, we still had his chart. So I thought, how did he end up struggling in our lobby? Like, what's the path that brought him there? What was he on Route 2, or was he on? And then he goes along there. How did he get to us? And what happened was he was dementing, and he was at home, and he became ill, and he just became lethargic. And his wife, his dear little wife, who should never have been his Health Care Proxy, called 911, and he was septic. He had an infection, maybe it was a UTI, I don't remember, and he was septic. So just like Julia Child, right? Remember what he said? "You'll be dead in 48 hours if we don't treat you." Well, this guy was treated. They gave him antibiotics because that's what you do, right? That's our knee-jerk, that's all of our knee-jerk reaction right now, isn't it? And then he went to a rehab unit for a while to recover because he was weak. Probably went to a nursing home. And he came home again. And then he got to be too much for his wife to handle. He went to a nursing home, and then he kept bouncing back and forth between hospital, nursing home, home. Hospital, nursing home, home. And now he was coming back to a nursing home, and this was going to be his final time. His wife his needs were just too much for his wife to deal with, and he was becoming more frustrated and therefore more violent. So that's where we were. And I thought, okay, so if he and they were completely freaked out that he had this mental illness, because they were so stigmatized, so no one talked about it, right? So what would he have had to do to avoid ending up wanting me to end his life in the lobby of Charlene Manor? He would have had to have a conversation with a Health Care Proxy who could carry out his wishes, which might have been his son, who was also there. and to say, I don't want antibiotics. If I get, I'm dementing, I don't want to be this way. Allow me to die naturally. If something comes up, don't treat it with antibiotics, because I'm never going to be the same person again, right? And he could have died within 48 hours and been made very comfortable, and that would have been it. And it would have probably saved him a lot of suffering. A lot of suffering.
If he was able to stay home and get
Well,
some
there,
kind of care,
well-
because then there's that piece of it too.
you do.
Financially, if he wanted to stay home.
Yeah, but he would have been dead months earlier. It would have just,
Yeah,
you
but I
know?
mean, if his wife couldn't care for him, then.
Yeah, but she kept caring for
Yeah.
him, like 3 different
I
times.
understand.
So this was a long process from when he had had this septic event until the moment when
How old Emil was he?
he wasn't even 80. He was in his late 70s. So that's a case where, I mean, he knew about the dementia for a while probably, if someone told him. But that's where the planning can be really, really, the difference between, do I just linger and suffer, and am I miserable, and is my wife miserable, and
Because this is progressive, I don't think.
it is progressive, Lewy body, it's very progressive. Or do I make a preemptive decision to say, not only do I not want the things on the most form, antibiotics aren't listed on the most form, but you can say no more antibiotics if you want to. And a lot of people would say, oh, that's horrible. How could you not treat an infection? Well, there are times when it's appropriate not to treat infections anymore. To give palliative care, which means pain reduction and comfort and, maybe calling in hospice at a certain point.
What they used to say about pneumonia, it's an old.
It's the old man's friend.
Yeah.
Right.
When you got to that.
It did, but now we treat everything, right? So that was to me a very powerful story, because I wasn't expecting, I didn't know what I was gonna find when I looked at his chart. I kind of had to analyze it and piece it together.
So he had no healthcare proxy.
I think his wife was his healthcare proxy, and she just wanted everything done because she loved her husband and she couldn't imagine doing anything different.
Did you have any response to him? I'm just curious what he said to you, to your face. Just kill me.
I just said, I wish I could help you. I really do wish I could have helped him. I'm so sorry. If it had been in my power to help him, I would totally have helped him do something. But he was physically strong. So it's a miracle to me that he died as quickly as he did. I think he just gave up. Maybe he stopped eating and drinking. So, not to end on a horrific note, but that's what happens when you miss the Route 2 exit. You have to go the way around. He did end up dying and mercifully didn't have to live much longer, hating his decline the way it occurred.
Can I tell you a little short story?
Absolutely.
Way back in nursing so many years ago. Remember there was this woman and she, where her cancer started, I don't remember, but she had a pelvic examination, but they take everything out. And they were like specialists coming in all the time. I was doing private duty, so she was my one patient, and I was kept busy because there was so much going on. And I remember her saying that, and that was the time when they didn't tell someone we had cancer.
Ugh.
I've been a nurse for 51 years.
Yeah. So back in the 60s and the 70s, they didn't tell
From
people.
the 70s, and she said, I know when I was at dinner, I would
See?
I forget what the end of that sentence was, but boy, that one was long.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and fortunately, that doesn't happen that
Yeah,
often
no, it
anymore.
doesn't,
It still does, though.
Yeah.
It still does.
Back in
People
the
are
day.
afraid to talk about death, like, oh, we're gonna make it happen if we talk about it. It's gonna happen whether we talk about it or whether we don't talk about
I also remember a young person, and it's the brother of somebody who I can't mention because you would know, had a bicycle accident, and he was brain, and I remember they pulled the plug. So, I always wondered about that. How do they just do that? Or just did it?
Well, you know,
Yeah, but-
again,
yeah.
if you have these conversations and you know that somebody wouldn't want to live this diminished life, and it's for everybody to choose. Some people would say, I want life, if I have a quarter of a centimeter's chance of any kind of life at all, keep me alive. Everybody has their preference.
Look at Stephen Hawking. Most people would not want to have lived physically the life that he lived.
Well,
And
he lived remarkably long with, no one lives that long with ALS.
how
Even
did
the
that
people-
happen? But
It's
what
a-
he said was it was a
Losing
gift to
his
him
diagnosis.
because he was totally free to think,
Mhm.
which was what he loved to do. And everything else didn't matter.
What the hell?
And he did think it.
But he lived for like, what, 25, 30 years?
I think
Was he
50
like
years.
70-something when he
I
died?
think it was 50 years since his diagnosis.
That's,
It was unbelievable.
because most people die within 5 years of diagnosis of ALS, they just can't swallow anymore or something, so it's
Diagnosed.
pretty remarkable. In any case, everybody's got their own story, everybody has their own preferences and wishes, and so we all get we have the really, the deep responsibility and opportunity to think about what we want, and then we're obliged, I think, to communicate it, if we want those wishes carried out. Hoping, what do they say? A hope is not a plan. I think Atulka one day says that in his book.
Wings or something.
Well, that's the Emily Dickinson poem. Anyway.
With feathers.
Hope is the thing with feathers, yes. So wishing that, oh, I want to have a good death. Well, okay, that's a good starting point, but now let's be a little more specific.
That's a good book, anymore, very good book.
I do have other handouts, so here's one that I really want you to have. Here are two. This one is a wonderful story by a woman who is a medical ethicist, and even though she knew her father didn't want to be tied up to machines, her father ended up tied to machines. So it's a really good, it's food for thought. And this is from the National Institute on Aging, and it is excellent about understanding healthcare decisions, and it talks about things like pacemakers, and I love to talk about pacemakers, so next time we can talk about pacemakers. I think this is really excellent. This would be a good thing to pass along to your healthcare proxy, whoever they are.
I have to read these.
Because it's a really good summary of information. And these books, which are on my list, most of them, are also excellent if you enjoy reading, as I do. My favorite topic. If you like reading about end-of-life stuff and death, there's tons. And there's just another book coming out every 2 seconds, it seems. New York Times is full of articles about death and dying. Jane Brody, I got that book sent too. Did sort of a compilation book about end-of-life stuff. That's quite good.
And your local public library will have all of them.
Yes.
We'll have them for you.
Exactly. Thank you, Marjorie. So there are so many resources. If you're not sure, start with this stuff, these resources, and look at the links and also the book titles. This one is excellent. My Mother, Your Mother. It's written by Dennis McCullough, who was a geriatrician in Vermont, a lovely man who died a couple of years ago. And this one kind of leads you through the natural aging process and what you can expect, and kind of like preparing, like it helps you kind of see things coming before they get there, which is good, so you can prepare for it. And the subtitle is Embracing Slow Medicine, the Compassionate Approach to Caring for Your Aging Loved Ones. It's just excellent, and you don't have to read it in order. You can just sort of pick and choose chapters. It's, he's a very sensitive person, and he writes about his own mother. So she's the subject, and her trajectory through the end of her life is the thread through this book. So this is really good for dealing with your own aging parents or your own aging selves. And then the Atul Gawande book.
Yeah.
I wish I could write this book, oh my gosh. He's so good. Yeah. There's a lot of, and this one is also good. This one is written by two sisters, one of whom is a doctor and one of whom is a lawyer, talking about advanced directives and living wills.
A
better way of dying.
Oh, I think they spoke here, somewhere. I didn't know I saw this.
It's very good. So there are a lot of little case studies in here. Apparently I spilled water on it. And I think I like case studies and stories because it makes it real. It's like, it's hard when it's just all theoretical, but when you can think of real people and, you know, how you make decisions, like the Julia Child thing, or like my patient at Charlie Manor, or people that you may know in your lives who've had either really good experiences or bad ones. And people have both, you know? So all we can do is try, but I think planning really helps a lot.
I just want to mention that I'm in this group for about 2 years. It's a death and dying, what they call cafes now.
Oh, a death cafe.
It's just
Uh-huh.
6 of us, 3 couples, and we meet once a month and we talk about all these issues. And it's, you know, it seems morbid, but, you know, it's not morbid today, is it? I mean, we treat it with humor. We have written our obituaries, and
Oh, you did it already?
yeah, I
Me
have to
too.
look at it again. and see if I
Oh, you have to
can
be
change it.
revising it.
Yeah. Make
You're
it better.
going to be able to add to it that you learned how to play the guitar at some point.
Yeah, right. That'll be my claim to fame.
That's right, that's right.
But I love a good obituary anyways. I read them, I mean, I think
Yeah.
they're so fascinating.
They're fun.
Yeah.
I really do not like the ones that just say, you know, they had 6 children and they had 6 children and they had 6. Talk about the person. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I
not just
know.
about,
I agree, because otherwise it's like someone you've never met.
yeah, and some people
Something
have
personal.
fascinating, wonderful lives. They're inspirational, I think, and so it does teach you to say, well, you know, maybe I want to do some of these things before I hit the road,
Exactly.
Jack.
There's a group, John Berkowitz is
Yeah,
a
John.
man from, he lives in Northampton, and he just finished up now I think the 5th year of meetings, and they meet every other weekend, and he has them in different places. I can get you his contact information if you're interested.
Just look online.
He does one in South Deerfield at the Senior Center and one at Rock Ridge, I think, in Northampton. And so just people, whoever wants to come, and sometimes they read poems, and they'll have maybe a theme, or someone will say, oh, you know, I had a bad week, my dog died, or my mother died, or whatever it is. And it's just a forum. It sounds like similar to what you guys
I did some
do.
sessions here, I went to his group, I mean,
Yeah.
I know him from other things, but he did like 2 or 3 6-week sessions in Greenfield.
Oh,
The Senior
nice.
Center, but he's obviously going other places.
So he called it, let's see, it was living well, aging gracefully, and accepting death.
Something.
Those were kind of the three threads that got woven together. And as we age, you know, we're dealing with more illnesses and losing, you know, contemporaries who are dying, or our parents who are living to be gazillion, or who finally die. It's fun, you know, it's good to have a place where you can talk about those things.
Yes.
Yeah. And having the humor part is really important. If you can't laugh about it, then,
I don't think any of you are shooting humor.
oh no, we gotta be able to laugh about the whole meal. All right, thank you very much for coming. I applaud you all for being here.
Thank you for doing it with such a smile.
You're well, it's my favorite topic. It really is, I love it. And please take one of my cards if you like, and I think my contact information is also on.
Yeah.
It is sort of, but anyway, I have business cards and I just had 500 of them. And I'll be here again in 2 weeks to talk about
The most, right?
the most form.
All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.